Thank you all for calling in, and I just want to let you know in advance that we may need to be a little bit informal here as we're dealing with as we're dealing with all the technical issues of running a Zoom meeting. So forgive me if I'm sort of back and forth a little bit with April, who is our board administrator, or with any of the other panelists. Welcome. I want to go over the agenda for this meeting really quickly and a couple of logistics, and then I will make a few brief remarks just to get us started, and then we'll launch into the meeting. So for the agenda for this meeting, we're going to start out with the welcome. We'll move into the approval of the 2020 meeting minutes. You will have a chance to vote through a poll that should pop up on your screen when we're doing the approval of the meeting minutes. After that, we'll have a business update from our general manager, Paul Guidone. Then we will have a discussion of the co-op finances from board member and treasurer Peggy O'Neill and director of finance Mark Langlois. We'll move into a member comments and questions section after that, and I'm going to give some instructions on how we'll be handling that. And then after that, we'll have a presentation on the King Award from board member Manish Kumar. Immediately following the close of the business meeting, we'll move into the candidates forum, which will be hosted and moderated by board member Emmanuel Ajavan. So that is what we'll be covering in the agenda. Thank you, April. So in terms of the logistics for this meeting, attendees should be able to see all of the panelists, which is the board members and some of the co-op employees, including our general manager. We cannot see you, but so that's the view that you should have. We are not going to be really using chat during this annual meeting. What we're going to do instead is ask everyone to put questions and comments into the Q&A box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. There should be a little box that says Q&A. We're going to ask you to put all kind of questions and comments in there. And that's both throughout the meeting and also specifically in the member comments and questions section. We receive a report on those questions and comments after the meeting. So to the extent that we aren't able to get to any particular questions or comments during the meeting, we will get back to you afterwards. If you are not able to use the Q&A function, then you can also email questions or comments to the president's email address. And I should have introduced myself. I'm Jessica Satterley Hall. I am the president of the board of directors. So I will be the one for the moment receiving these emails. The email address is president@coopfoodstore.coop. Again, that's president@coopfoodstore.coop. So if you have any questions or comments that you aren't able to share in the Q&A, please feel free to send them to that email address.
Jessica, quick question. It looks like some of the attendees are only seeing the speaker view, so I don't see an option to adjust the view to gallery. Maybe, do you see that option to adjust to gallery view so that folks can see all the panelists? Mine's set for gallery view.
I think that may be something they have to adjust themselves.
Okay, so the
individually.
Yeah, folks, if you have the option up in the upper right corner, there should be a bunch of squares that says view, and you can hit speaker view or gallery view and see if that helps.
And it looks like, so I'm gonna keep going. If it looks like maybe Manish is typing some answers, and April, maybe you can participate in that as well. I'm going to try to not run logistical support too much, just so we don't get too bogged down in that. I apologize if there are problems. Okay, so those are a couple logistics. I apologize if all you're able to see is my bright shiny face. You will see others as we transition them over to being speakers. Okay, so again, questions and comments, please put those into the question and comment box. I will be viewing that more when we get to the member comments and questions section with assistance from April. And again, anything we don't get to, we'll send a response afterwards. So moving into a couple of remarks and then we'll keep going. So 1 year ago, we had our first remote annual meeting. At that time, I don't think many of us thought that we would be doing this again a year later. I'm sure we hoped we wouldn't be, but here we are. And in the meantime, I think we've adapted and we've all demonstrated how resilient we can be, both as individuals and as an organization. From the panic buying and the rapid implementation of safety measures in the spring of 2020 to the uncertainty of the summer and the worsening crises faced by our nation in the fall and the winter, whether it was implementing mask mandates, rolling out curbside pickup, or addressing supply chain challenges, the co-op as an organization, and in particular its employees, have shown again and again their adaptability and their resilience. At this time, I would like to offer a heartfelt thank you to all of the co-op's employees for their essential service to the co-op and to the Upper Valley community during a time of national and global crisis. So thank you all very much. If we were all present, we would be giving a round of applause, which I can see the other panelists are doing as well. So thank you all very much. I'd also like to thank the co-op's leadership team by name. Amanda Charland is our Director of Cooperative Engagement. Bruce Follett is our Director of Business Unit Operations. Lori Hildbrand is the Director of Administrative Operations. Mark Langlois is our Director of Finance, and Alan Reitz is our Director of Public and Government Affairs. So thank you very much, LT. The board of directors only directly manages one employee, and I'd like to also thank him at this time. Our general manager, Paul Guidone, has brought rigor and stability to the co-op at a time when both have been essential. Paul's weekly messages to co-op member owners and his Monday and Thursday messages to employees have been transparent and informative, offering strong leadership during a turbulent year. So thank you very much, Paul. And make no mistake, this has been a very complicated year in the grocery business. We'll hear more about the last year in the business update from the general manager and during the discussion of finances from our treasurer and director of finance. In this complicated and difficult year, one word we've heard a lot captures, for me, the significance of the co-op and its employees, and the word is essential. The dictionary defines essential as absolutely necessary and extremely important. During the pandemic, our co-op has been an essential business. Co-op employees are essential workers. The truth is that the co-op and its employees were always essential before, during, and after the pandemic. And our co-op principles are essential to holding it together. The 7 cooperative principles are voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. I would urge all of our members and interested folks in the community to learn more about the cooperative principles on our website and acknowledge how essential those are to us as an organization. So on that note, let's move forward with some democratic member control and get the annual meeting started. So I will take our motion to approve the 2020 meeting minutes.
I move to approve the minutes of the 2020 annual meeting.
Thank you, Rosemary. And do we need a second for that motion? Do I have a second? Thank you, Ed. And it looks like attendees, you should be able to see a poll in front of you and you can click yes, no, or abstain. So we'll give that a minute. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. I'm going to, April, can you end that poll, please? And the motion passes. Thank you very much. I'm going to close this now. Or actually, April, should we share those results? The motion did pass by, I think, 83% and the rest abstaining. Great, thank you very much. So I will now move on to the business update from our general manager, Paul Guidone.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time this morning to join us. And I appreciate the opportunity to address you somewhat in person, but we'll make the best of it from there. Last year, 2020, as Jessica has already alluded to, and if you've had the opportunity to at least read some of the pieces that I put out on a weekly basis, is a year that's totally going to be defined by COVID-19. It's not to say that there weren't a lot of other issues that arose during the course of the year. Police tactics, elections, you name it, there's always something somewhere lurking around. But when we started the year, COVID really wasn't an issue here in the United States. It was a over there kind of issue. And we started out the year working off of our operating plan and trying to implement what was our strategic plan for 2020 and beyond. Working off of what we did, which SWOT analysis, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We had lots of infrastructure investments we had to make. As you know, we also borrowed money. You enabled us to refinance some high price debt and to borrow some additional money for that. So that was one of the things that we were working on. And there are a myriad of other things, software upgrades, you name it. Then March came along, and that changed everything in a bit of a heartbeat. COVID became real here, and it really took over and changed and created both chaos and confusion. There's no way you can describe it in any other terms. Everything that we were trying to do through 2020 had to be put on hold. Everyone within the co-op had to become an expert on how to keep people safe. I convened our leadership team on a daily basis, Monday through Friday from 9 to 10. Jessica's already introduced all the members of the team, so I'll just use their first names as we go through this. Every morning when we got together, Lori would come in with what was the latest updates in terms of healthcare provisions. Mark would come in every day and we'd want to know what our position is in terms of cash. Are we having any problems with vendors, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and the like? Bruce would come in and give us an update on what was happening in the stores, customers, safety, and the like. Alan would give us an update every morning on what was happening in government affairs. And Amanda obviously was giving us a sense of what was happening on social media and what she was hearing from members. I myself would do some different type of analyses that would get into minutia, which I won't go into in here. From those meetings, I undertook doing a daily email update, 5 days a week initially, to employees to keep them up to speed on what was happening. It was a time of concern, time of panic. It was very difficult for individuals. Jessica talked about essential. Our colleagues in the stores are on the front line, have been on the front line, have always been on the front line. But during a period where nobody really knew what to expect, whether people were going to come in, how they were going to come in, who was healthy, who wasn't healthy, and how safe they could be. We all became experts very quickly in having to put in plexiglass and personal protection equipment, masks, cleaning policies in the stores, which were always very aggressive, got ramped up rather significantly. Changing hours to make it accessible for individuals who were deemed high risk and the elderly early in the morning, and then for essential service workers beyond our grocery workers in the community later in the day. We made rapid changes. You know, there's a theory in investment finance. I'm just going to divert to that for a second. That's called rational expectations theory. And what it basically says in the simplest of terms is when things start to get tough, people need to diversify and basically tool down their risk, move into less risky assets. So from stocks to bonds or cash, whatever. The reality of it is when things go bad, people panic and they move to the safest of all assets, which is cash. Well, we saw that in the grocery world here. When the pandemic hit and people were concerned to go out, you all, members, shoppers, whomever, every one of us started to diversify our risk. We went shopping less often. We wanted more contactless ways of shopping. We brought out online service and curbside pickup. And when we did shop, we bought in larger quantities. We stockpiled. And that was very rational on an individual level. And every one of us did it. The challenge with that, however, is it put tremendous strains on supply chains. Supply chains were broken all over. Our merchandising team, led by Jacob Vincent, did a yeoman's job in sourcing secondary and tertiary distributors and vendors locally for product. It really put us on the map in terms of what it means to be local in terms of sourcing and delivering products. The types of things that people were looking for, replete, paper items, hard to understand why, but there it was. And we had to fight the ever-ending issue of, we do not want to have our shelves looking empty. So our teams went out and worked very hard to make sure that the shelves were stocked. But through it all, prices went up, businesses went out of business, cash was a concern for any entity to have. One of the ironies of 2020 and the COVID situation is it did slow the economy rather dramatically. Many businesses, as I say, did fold up. Employees were laid off. Fortunately, we didn't endure that because as a food store at the end of the day, and an essential service and a service station, which was more disproportionately hit. We weathered that, but not without our own issues. As I mentioned, we had endured a lot of expense to make sure that we had safety and safe environment for our employees. In addition to which, we wanted to make sure that they were being rewarded for staying with us during one of the most difficult times that probably any of them have ever faced in their career, when their own health was at risk. So that took us into the area of doing differentials in pay and discretionary bonuses throughout the course of the year. So all of that comes to the pass of, it was a chaotic year. But once we went from chaos and frenzy to more stabilized frenzy, leadership team, we were able to meet 3 times a week. Now we're meeting twice a week. I do 2 emails to employees. I still do the weekly email to members. Things are starting to settle down into a more normal level. We don't see quite the level of panic buying as we saw, which is good. We still see individuals using curbside and not coming into the store. As vaccinations are starting to take hold, we're seeing people start to become a little bit more comfortable with shopping in store rather than necessarily at curbside. But through it all, what we saw economically, just the basic bottom line impacts. Transactions were down. Foot traffic in the stores were down. Items purchased were up rather significantly. Basket sizes, what people were buying and paying for, were up rather significantly. We were in a very strong position because of that. The thing that really made a lot of difference for us in 2020 was when the SBA, Small Business Administration, came out with their Payroll Protection Program, PPP. Now, I'm not going to break out into an old McDonald's song and do EIEIO next, but with all of those acronyms out there, the bottom line was we were able to borrow money, a rather significant amount, $3 million, to help us get through this time period. It's a forgivable loan, and we only needed $2.3 million of that $3 million. And Mark will go into a bit more of that in the financials. But that enabled us to make sure that we were able to take care of our essential employees, both in all the protection that we put in the stores, the masks that we bought, the masks that people made, giving people time off when they needed it because they just were too emotionally stressed, and the discretionary bonuses. So it was a tough year. We got through it. The team is standing strong. The business is in very healthy condition, but we're not out of the woods yet. You know, CDC is changing guidance almost on a daily basis, and we are trying to very much react to those proclamations without overreacting. So where does that leave us now? Well, we're back to trying to do business as normal. The money that we borrowed last year at much lower rates, we are now deploying in our Lebanon store refrigeration upgrade. As I mentioned, one of the ironies of the pandemic was a slowing down economy, except necessarily totally for us, and a decline in interest rates. It also enabled us to refinance significant amount of debt that we had from our Hanover store renovation that we had on the books at 5% down to about 2.5%. And the money that we borrowed to, in essence, do our upgrades also at a much lower interest rate, somewhere between 2.5% and 2.8%. So always a silver lining somewhere if you look for it. And that was it for us, which has helped this business dramatically. So I'll let Mark go into more of the financials. Obviously, Peggy will lead that off as our board treasurer. But at this point in time, I just want to do a couple of thank yous myself. Earlier in the year, I wrote about the soul of the business and what I meant by that. And in this environment, the soul of the business, the part of that I want to focus on is the people part. And that starts with our members and our shoppers. You have been phenomenal through all of this. You've continued to support us. You've sent your ideas on how we can potentially do things differently, either in through co-op comments or to myself directly. And most importantly, you practice social distancing. You took our messaging on that very seriously. You protected yourselves and you protected our employees. And that is what it's all about at the end of the day. The board, I want to thank the board for their guidance, their support, and for enabling management to basically get on real time and run the business as it needed to be run in this chaotic environment. But I want to offer a very special thanks to my colleagues in the stores and in the service centers. If it weren't for them, there would be none of this. They endured close contact, sometimes not so nice customers coming in the way they were being treated. And they could have easily bailed out when their health was at risk, but they didn't. They hung in there. They made everyone's shopping experience that much more enjoyable in what was a lousy environment. They demonstrated what it means to be professional and to show up and to be present. And finally, I'd like to thank my leadership team that I euphemistically refer to as the Gang of Five. I won't tell you what they refer to me as, but we'll leave that for what it is, for making sure that every day, every policy we come out with, every idea we try to implement, they're on it and they get it done. And that's what it's about. That's the soul of this business, teamwork. Thank you, Jessica. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Peggy, our board chair, Peggy O'Neill, and Mark Langlois, our director of finance, to go through the financials of 2020 in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. What a wonderful overview of, as we all know, has been a year none of us were prepared for, and a year that you and your team and the amazing employees at the co-op just stepped up in ways that were unprecedented. So huge thank you to all of you. Paul did a great job at giving you all the overview of what's been going on with the co-op this past year. Now we're going to zero in a little bit on some of the higher level financial implications. First, I want to give a huge thanks to Paul, Mark, and everyone on the financial management team. You were showing up and figuring things out daily. And at the end of the year, we just completed the audit. Baker, Newman, and Noyes just completed the audit. And the audit went very well. It was an unmodified opinion, which is the best that can be. And that's a real tribute to the entire financial management team for getting that done. As everyone has said, this has been a very, very different year, but there were some highlights from the year. Sales were up. As Paul mentioned, COVID spending contributed greatly to this. Members of the co-op, those of you who are at this annual meeting and those of you who will be listening or reading about it, 75% of sales were generated by our members. So thank you all for that. As Paul said, the co-op secured a payroll protection loan, and that loan was used in the way this loan was intended to be used, which was to invest in the employees at the co-op and in the safety and personal protective gear that was needed so that all of us could show up at the co-op and do our shopping. Kudos to all for getting that PPP loan done. I know that it was a little bit of a scramble as the SBA was rolling that out with local banks. There was a lot of questions that people didn't have answers to. So kudos to everyone for that. There will not be a patronage refund this year, and Mark can share a little bit more about that. And then lastly, Pennies for Change. You know, this wonderful, wonderful program that the co-op has where we have an opportunity when we're purchasing groceries to round up to the nearest full dollar and to then invest in our local community through philanthropic support. Pennies for Change surpassed $1 million of giving, and that's a real credit to everyone who shops at the co-op for making this possible. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who is so smart and much smarter than I am about the co-op's finances, to give you some of the details from this past year. Thank you all.
Thank you, Peggy. April, can we put up our slideshow? There we are. So this is the first page of a short slideshow we have for you folks. The biggest thing here on this page is we are going to receive an unmodified audit report for this year, which means the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the co-op. And as Peggy was saying, this is the opinion you want to get from your auditors. Could I have page 2, please? Here's a condensed income statement for the co-op, comparing this year to last year. And as we see, we got $85 million in sales for the current year, which is about 10% above last year. Again, that ramps up because of the COVID, but people ramping up their food purchases, stockpiling and such. As we go down, we got a profit margin of about 33.2%, which is up slightly from 32.8% from the prior year. And that's just a mix of products we're selling. The next big line we see is the wages and benefits, up almost $2.5 million from the prior year. Again, that goes back to paying discretionary bonuses to employees, bringing in temporary help, replacing employees that decide to move on. It's all those costs are built up in there. Other costs are up slightly through the rest of the year, but again, it all has to deal with the personal protective equipment and other expenses related to curbside. As we move down through the bottom, we see the earnings available for patronage refund. This year's a minus $301,000. So this is the operations of the business based on what's available for patronage. We can only patronage back out to members what is derived from actual patronage with them. So you buying groceries from us, we can give you a patronage refund based on that activity. We cannot give you patronage based on other activities, which we'll go into in a second here. Now, other income of $2.2 million is not available for patronage refund. What that is, there was a small gain on some fixed assets, and there was also the SBA's payroll protection plan grant accounting for that. We accounted for that as a grant, so we took that into income in the current year, and it shows up in this section, but it's not patronage refundable because it had nothing to do with members purchasing from our co-op. And so we move down through, we see we have a patronage refund of $0. Then we have the taxes for the current year of $64,000. Most of that had to do with New Hampshire's franchise tax, I'll call it a business enterprise tax, which is based off from a certain percentage off from what we do for payroll and what we do for interest expenses. That gives us a net savings of $1.8 million. Next slide, please. Here we see graphically the changes in the income for the year. with a huge spike up in the graph from 76 million to 85 million. And we also see the slight deviations in gross margin from 32 to 33%. We also see a slight uptick in direct wages of 16.38 versus a general administrative expenses are 7.87 versus a 7.36. This just gives you a graphic presentation of how these expenses have tracked through the year. And by far the biggest jump we see here is obviously the sales. Again, 75% of our sales were to members and 25% was to non-member customers. Next page. Here's a consolidated balance sheet, and we see cash is one of the biggest numbers on here, $6.9 million. That includes the money we got from this SBA under our PPP loan of about $3 million, and the refinancing for equipment upgrades around $3.3 million. And we've started just to order the equipment, so we're not seeing that showing up in the property, plant, and equipment at this point, but we'll be seeing that coming through in the next few months as equipment shows up and we start renovating or updating the Lebanon store. Accounts payables approximately the same from prior year. Current debt maturities is up slightly because of the additional loan. And then long-term debt is the other piece that went up from 2.2 to 6 million. Approximately, that includes a piece of the SBA's PPP that we're going to be paying back to the SBA, as well as the long-term debt associated with the construction loan and the refinancing. And members' equity is up from 6.9 to 8.72, and that's in relation to that large grant accounting number that we can't patronage back out. It gets retained by the co-op and retained earnings. Next slide, please. Here's some graphs that we've seen in prior years. We just updated them for the current year. Top graph is showing basket size by location. As we see this, as Paul was mentioning, that people were stocking up. Well, this is showing you that people were ramping up their basket size. So from around $40 in total in 2019, it's now up to almost $60 in a basket size for each transaction. And if we look at the bottom section, we also see that the customer counts are down, which also speaks to what Paul was saying, that customers are coming in, stocking up, and coming less to the stores. Average basket size are up over 42% due to the change in the customer shopping patterns from 2019. Next slide, please. This is our last slide, but it just gives you a brief update on where pennies for change is. You see how much we've raised in each year since the inception in June of 2016. And as of the date of this slide was created, we were up over $1 million patronage, or rather not patronage, but distributed out to various charities throughout the Upper Valley. So good job on that. And with that, I guess I go back to Jessica.
Thank you very much, Mark and Peggy. All right, we are running on time, which is great. So now we're going to move into our member comments and questions section. So again, we are looking to use the question and answer button for this portion of the meeting. If you open up that tab, you should be able to see there are 3 different tabs there, one for open, answered, and dismissed. Dismissed are basically just some of the things that happened at the beginning or repeats. Answered are some of the questions that have been answered so far, and then we can take more questions in the open section. I was just typing a response to one of the most recent questions, which was about what board expenses cover. I'll just complete my response to that verbally. Board expenses cover a number of items, including and the total amount of the budget is set according to the bylaws. It's a percentage of the organization's sales. And the board budget includes the cost of the annual audit, the auditor's fees. It also includes legal expenses, administrative costs for the board. In a normal year, it would cover the costs of running the annual meeting and sort of meeting costs and things like that. So that is what is generally contained in the board budget. This time we'll take more questions or comments. So feel free to type those into the question and answer boxes. And if we don't have any more questions at this time, we can keep going. I will remind folks that if you have questions or comments that come up, or if you're not able to use the Q&A function for any reason, please send your questions and comments to the email president@coopfoodstore.coop, and I will work to get them answered. I'm going to give it another couple of seconds in case anybody has any questions. Don't want to rush through this. Okay, I've got a question here. Can you give any more detail about the cost of temporary employees? Paul, can I turn that one to you?
Thank you. Happy to. Through the course of the early part of last year, we brought on a number of temporary employees so that we could get our online curbside delivery system up and running. We initially intended that to be a program pre-COVID that would have been launched probably in the fourth quarter of 2020. But once it started to come on board, we needed to get on it straight away. So we needed to bring in individuals. We also had people who were concerned about coming in for their health, but we needed to keep the stores running. So we had brought in some temporary employees. One of the things that I kind of passed by somewhat was in the early days, we did a lot of scenario or war game planning. What happens if so many employees were to become infected with COVID and weren't available? How far down could we go, or how high could our unemployment rate go, such that we'd have to close a department or a store? The same thing if sales had dropped off. And part of that was once we started to get to trigger points, we would bring in some temporary employees. And that's what was going on with temporary employees. Many of them have become permanent employees as part of our online program.
Thank you. All right. So if I'm seeing a follow-up question about what percentage of our workforce was temporary over what period of time. I don't know if you have that number at your fingertips, Paul, but maybe you could comment on that, or we can get an email off after the meeting.
It was relatively small in the aggregate. We can probably get I know Lori probably has the exact number if she back in the office if she doesn't already know it. And if she does, obviously feel free to jump in. But I think we were looking at something like 30 employees that were temporary. So put that on top of a base of roughly 400 employees. So, 7-8% in that round number. But as I say, many of them became full-time, and we're probably at 380, give or take, in employees. It's also important to know that our makeup, unlike most grocery stores, 83% full-time, 17% part-time. The industry average is about 20% full-time, 80% part-time.
If I may jump in, temporary employees are on board for about 3 months. That is as long as we have a temporary slot open. At the end of that time, most of them, in this particular case, did become regular employees unless they had gone back to their original jobs. So we were very successful in bringing them in and in maintaining them as employees.
Thank you. All right, I see another question. Looking for another silver lining. Has the pandemic year given us any operational or governance changes that we will use from now on? Invention is the mother of necessity, ... Paul, any thoughts on that?
Sure, I'll talk to the operational ones and leave it to the board on the governance aspects. As I mentioned, one of the things that we we did was our online ordering and curbside. One of the things that we're looking at going forward will be how do we blend our long-term standing senior delivery program with our online ordering. So that's one. We're doing some rather significant, what's called business canvas modeling work for our community market and our service centers to try to better understand what the customer base for those two entities are looking for and how do we remodel those businesses. And I don't mean remodel in the physical sense, I mean in the business practice sense. We eliminated scoop bins last year, and we're going to gravity bins as part of the pandemic control. So those are some of the big things that we've changed. Communication is one of probably the biggest things. As I said, we've started communicating. We're now at twice weekly with employees. That's going to continue for as long as, even post the pandemic. I believe every employee needs to know what's happening. We've instituted quarterly updates with employees to give them a sense of, this is what we set out at the beginning of the year or the quarter for what our goals are. Here's how we're doing. These are the adjustments that we might need to make or the additions that we're making. So communication is a big change. And one of the others is we are, I'm very happy to say, we are actually back to being able to ramp up our organization as a learning organization. Lori's team is working a lot on training and development. So now that we kind of settled down from this pandemic, we're getting back into employee development in a big, meaningful way. One of those things will be our assistant store manager program, expected to launch in the second half of this year.
Thank you, Paul. In terms of governance changes or sort of board-oriented changes, I think at a high level, the board has looked for opportunities to simplify some of its policies and kind of streamline the reporting that we ask our general manager for, which hopefully kind of focuses his time in the areas that we think are most important. And so we're still working on some policy changes, I think, that may make a difference in that area. But other than that, I think we're actually looking forward to being able to be in the same room again someday, though everyone's gotten much more comfortable with meeting remotely, but we're looking forward to being in the same room again. We're coming up on the close of this portion of the meeting, but we've got a couple of remaining questions. One is about what temp agency we used for temporary employees. The other is how much income was generated by curbside pickup in what time period? Paul, do you want to tackle either of those?
I'll tackle the last one. Curbside last year was running approximately 9 months in our Hanover store, 6-ish months out of our Lebanon store, and probably a couple of 3 or 4 months or so out of the community market. All in for that time period on a blend, $1.4 million was generated. That approximated 1.6% of sales. If those numbers were annualized, they would be 1.8 and 2.2% respectively. So far this year, in the first 3 months, curbside is running 4 to 4.5% of total sales.
Great, thank you. Lori, did you want to address the other question?
Thank you, Jessica. I would love to. The temporary employees that we hired to work in building the online ordering and to fill other positions in the stores was all done directly. There's no agency involved.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Again, if more questions or comments come up, please feel free to email them to president@coopfoodstore.coop. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a discussion of the King Award, led by board member Manish Kumar.
Thank you, Jessica. Let me share my screen for this King Award. This is something different than what we have been discussing, but hopefully it's still exciting. So hopefully many of the board members or many of the members here on the call are probably familiar with the King Award. This King Award is basically honors our late Alan and Nan Kings, who joined the Hanover Co-op in 1941. Hopefully you can see that on my screen here. They were active co-op members and contributed to the co-op community in multiple ways, as board members, as presidents, as just members bringing in new and fresh ideas, and they truly embodied what co-op stands for. And one principle that they really believed in is the seventh principle of concern for community. So this award, the Nan King Award, tries to honor that by identifying a member from our community who best embodies those principles. Now, this year was unlike any other year in many different ways, and the same thing impacted the King Awards as well, because we did not receive any nominations for the King Award this year in 2021. So we had to look for alternative ways in which to best identify someone or some community, some part of our community who can be honored with this King Award. So in earlier years, the recipient who was identified and nominated by the members, there will be one recipient who will be identified as the recipient of this King Award, and they will be giving this $500 award to a charity of their choice. So since we didn't receive any nominations this year, we decided to go to the end charity directly. And we worked with our team here, everybody on the board, and got their input and identified some charities that we think will be worthy recipients. Any of them will be a worthy recipient, but we wanted to put that in front of you for you to vote on who you think will be an ideal recipient for 2021 for this prestigious King Award. So what we are hoping to get from you is, after this meeting, we will be sharing this survey form address with you, and then you can enter your co-op member number and you can select from one of these 5 areas. So we have identified these local agencies or communities or organizations in our community in areas of health, food access, environment, diversity, equity and inclusion, and miscellaneous. So there are 10 total organizations that are listed here, but you could mention any other organization that you do not find in this list. So that's also totally fine. And at the end of Friday the 9th, we will tally all the votes and find the organization that has received the most vote, and we will award the King Award for 2021 to that organization. Please also feel free to add any supporting statements that add a lot of weight as well, and definitely helps to make that decision easier for us. So I don't want to take up any more of your time during this meeting, but please make a note that you'll be receiving an email from us from April most likely about with a link to this form, and then you have up to 7 days, up to Friday the 9th, to submit your vote here. Now I'd like to pass it on to, please let us know if you have any questions about it, about the process or anything, or the selection process. But in case you don't, I'd like to pass it on to Jessica Giordani for her comments and the next phase. Jessica, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Manish. Do you want to take down your shared screen, or do we want to keep that up for this?
I can stop it now.
Thank you. All right, so I will be brief, but generally this part of the meeting belongs to the board president, but since she is part of this segment, I have the distinct pleasure this year of thanking our outgoing board members for their service to the co-op and for their time and for their commitment in this particularly challenging year. Jessica Satterley Hall is our board president, and her patience and leadership during this last year has been an exceptional gift to the functioning of our board. Rosemary Fifield, our board secretary, is also outgoing, and her procedural knowledge and institutional memory has been an invaluable resource to us all as we have navigated this year. And Ed House, who is one of our employee board members. Ed's heartfelt commitment to this co-op is evident every time he speaks. And it has been an absolute pleasure to serve on the board with all of you, and you will be missed. And I am only sad that we have not been able to have some of our final meetings together in person, because I will miss you all. And also, I would like to continue to extend the board's thanks to all of our co-op employees, because you have done such an exceptional job in everything you've been asked to do in this past year. So thank you. And I will turn the meeting back over to Jessica Satterley Hall.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And thank you to everybody who served on the board this year. Thank you very much. I see that I was just going to ask Manish to drop a link to the King Award survey into the chat box. It looks like he's done that. So thank you very much for that, Manish. I also just want to take this last moment as we close our business meeting and move into our candidates forum to remind all of our members to vote in the board of directors election, which is currently open. The voting is currently open and goes on throughout the month of April. And we, as a reminder, we do need to get a minimum of 500 votes in order to have a valid election. So your vote is very important, and I urge you to make sure that you get that done as soon as possible. So thank you very much for that, and please do vote for the Alan and Nan King Award. So with that, we are at the end of our program. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and to all of our panelists for their participation and their preparation. I think we will take a motion at this time to adjourn the annual meeting, and then we will begin the candidate forum. So I will take a motion to adjourn the 2021 annual meeting, please.
I can move that, Jessica. Motion to adjourn the 2020 annual meeting.
The 2021 annual meeting.
2021, yes, there you go.
I had to think about that for a second too. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Kevin. All right, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, let's do a digital hand, or a visual hand raise, please. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, all set, April? Okay, and I don't think we are unanimous on that, correct? Great. Okay, all right, this meeting is adjourned, and I am now going to turn it over to Emmanuel, please.